Okay guys, today we are going to talk about parametric equations. And so you need to know what you've been dealing with before now. Okay, up until this point in your math classes, you have most likely been dealing with things that look like this, where we have y's and x's and there's one equation. Now we're going to classify that and call it a rectangular equation. So the world that we've been living in up until now, we're calling rectangular. And so x's and y's and equations look normal. Now, parametric equations, that's what we're going to get into today. You have x's and y's, but they're in two separate equations. Notice that you now have a t. And what this is doing is basically putting a time into a graphing type situation. So at any time that you plug in, you can find out where the x value of the point was and where the y value of the point was. And so we're going to kind of sketch one so that you can understand in just a moment what I'm saying. It is important to learn what t is. T is what they're going to call your parameter. So if they ask you for the parameter, it's t. It's standing for time in this situation. And that's where they get the parametric graphs from, t being a parameter, those two words being related. The other thing that's going to be a little different is they're going to call your graphs plane curves. So if you see plane curve, that just means they're talking about the graph. Okay, here's our first example. We're going to sketch this graph. That would be the directions, sketch this graph. And we have an x equation where t is the variable and a y equation where t is the variable. And it tells us to use times or t's between -2 and 3. And so what I want you to do is make a little chart that has t, x, and y. And I want you to list all of those times that they tell you to list. Now granted, we could do decimals between -2 and 3, but just to get the general shape of the graph, we are going to do the integers between -2 and 3. So -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. We're going to fill these columns up by plugging the numbers for t into each equation. So starting with the x equation, if I plug in -2, -2 squared is 4, and 4 minus 4 is 0. If I plug in -1, -1 squared is 1, and 1 minus 4 is -3. 0, 0 squared is 0, minus 4 is -4. 1 squared is 1, minus 4 is -3. 2 squared is 4, minus 4 is 0. And 3 squared is 9, minus 4 is 5. So I've just plugged into the x equation. Now I want to plug into the y equation. So I'm plugging in the t. -2 over 2 is -1. Then I plug in -1. -1 over 2 is -1/2. 0 over 2 is 0. Then 1 over 2 is 1/2. 2 over 2 is 1. And 3 over 2 is 3/2, or 1.5. Okay, now we go to graph this. When we go to graph it, you want to focus on this column of numbers and this column of numbers. And you want to plot those just like you're plotting points when you graph. So you look at this as the point 0, -1. So 0, -1 is where I start. Then -3, -1/2. So 1, 2, 3. -1/2 is about right here. Then -4, 0. Then -3, 1/2. So -3, 1/2. And 0, 1. And 5, 1.5, or 3/2. Now, when you get all this plotted, you're going to realize that you don't necessarily have a function. This doesn't necessarily pass the vertical line test, so we're not necessarily living in the world of functions here. But the other thing is you want to connect them in order, because this is where the point was at time -2. This is where the point was at time -3. And it's kind of like a little connect the dots travel path. So start with the first point, connect it to the other points, and there's your shape. And since it just told us between -2 and +3, we're going to stop on this, or start on this point and end on this point. There are no arrows. It's just this section of the graph that we're looking at. Okay, the next two examples, I'm going to attempt to teach you how to do this in your calculator. And I cannot put a calculator on this screen, so I need you to get your calculator and follow along. Pause while you get your calculator. Okay, the first thing that I want you to do is go to your mode. Hit your mode button, and on about the 4th line down, you need to change to parametric mode, which is PAR. Once you have done that, when you go to your y equals button, you should look a little different than normal. You'll have an x1t and an y1t and an x2t and a y2t. In the x subscript 1 t, I want you to type in the first equation, which is the t squared. Now, you'll get the t from your x button. So normally where you go to hit your x button, now you're going to hit that same button and it's going to show up as a capital T. And since our equation is t squared, you want to type it in as squared. Then go down to the y sub 1t option and plug the second equation in, which would be t cubed. And again, the t's here come from hitting your x button that you would normally hit to get an x. Okay, now we need to go to the window. So the next place I want you to hit is your window button. You'll notice now you have a T-min and a T-max. So your T-min is now the -4 from up here. The T-max is the +4, because this is the range of time that you're looking at. The T-step is how often you want it to plot a point. So if you want it to plot every whole number, whole integer, then you put in a 1. And if you want to do that, you can see how funky your graph will look. The smaller that this number is, the better that the graph is going to look curve-wise, the smoother it's going to look. So I'm going to say, I'm going to put in 0.15 because that's a really small amount and it should make my graph look a very smooth, like a smooth graph. It's plotting a point every 0.15 seconds. And so again, if you want to play around with that and see the different changes that that does, again, the smaller the better, but the bigger can make things look kind of odd and funny. Alright, after you do that, if you want to go down to your x-min and x-max and y-min and y-max, those kind of work the same as they did before. So your x-min, and I'm just going to go to -10 like normal, standard window. And the x-max, I'm going to do +10. The y-min, I'm going to do -10. And the y-max, I'm going to do a +10. And that's just the standard viewing window, and if it doesn't fit, then we will have to change that. But if you want to hit graph now, you should be able to see this graph come up. And I got something a little bit like this. So if this is my X and Y axis, it was a curve up like this and a curve down like this. I think it drew it this way. So hopefully that's what you're seeing in your window. If you're not, call me over and let me help you right now. Okay, for our final example, we're going to do another one with a calculator, and I've changed it to one that needs to be in trig. So our x is equal to 3 cosine theta, and our y is equal to 4 sine theta, and these could be t's. So if they're t's, then this, if they're thetas, this should be a theta, but if they're t's, this should be a t. It's the same kind of idea as what we were talking about. This time, you should already be in parametric mode, so I want you to hit the mode button and make sure you're in radians, because our time is from 0 to 2 pi, which is obviously radians. And once you're there, you can go back to your x1 and type in 3 cosine theta, which will be x from your, or t from your window, because when you hit the x button, a t will come up. And then 4 sine t as your y. That's in your y equals again. That's where you're typing it in. And then when you go to your window, you definitely want to go to your window again because the time has changed. It's now going from 0 to 2 pi. So you want to type in 0 and then 2 and use that pi button to insert the pi so that it gets the exact decimal there. So after that, you choose your step, and again, if you've messed with it, the bigger ones kind of make it more boxy, the smaller ones make it more smooth. And I'm keeping this same -10 to 10 window. Pause and graph it. Okay, if you did it correctly, you should get something that's almost circular. It's obviously centered at 0, 0. I've just kind of roughly sketched it in here. It's not quite circular, but it's around that. So that's how you do it. And again, if you need help with this, now is the time to call me over. That is today's lesson. So you're ready for your assignment.